Hello everyone, I am Jason Lee from MMAI. Today's video will be on Khabib Nurmagomedov. As I said before, in order to do an Islam video, I have to do a Khabib video. If you haven't already, check out the system breakdown before watching this. It is essential to understanding this video in its totality. As always, I'm going to break up the analysis into specific case studies to represent the essential concepts that are key to understanding Khabib's talent, strategy, and system. We're going to first look at his fight with Abel Trujillo, which to me represents the beginning of Khabib's metamorphosis into the fighter he ends his career as. Then we will look at his fight with Rafael dos Anjos, or RDA, to investigate how the system holds up against a true jiu-jitsu ace. Then a sojourn into his title-winning bout versus Iaquinta, to investigate how Khabib tackles the challenge of the Serra-Longo jiu-jitsu system, which has on the whole given the Nurmagomedov system its toughest tests in the UFC. We'll close out with a breakdown of the last 3 submissions of Khabib's career by breaking down how he set them up throughout the preceding exchanges and rounds. Then, finish off the discussion of his merits in the greatest of all time conversation, both at lightweight and in UFC history. So let's dive into the first case study against the challenging Abel Trujillo. As a quick refresher of my system breakdown, remember that the system is predicated on strategic cardio attrition through use of 3 main tactics: guillotine traps, leverage, and limb lockdowns/grip attacks. To me, Trujillo represents the point at which Khabib has locked in his own tactical approach to using the system. He doesn't yet look like the absolute monster that shredded through Poirier and Gaethje, but this is where the ball gets rolling. The most important aspect of his record-setting performance versus Abel was to me the physical development he has seen in the maturation of his body as he continued to age. I believe the skills from this fight were always there, but Khabib entered the UFC so young that his body had not finished filling out muscularly, leading to him being unable to leverage his prodigious pressure grappling skills. There is still an important aspect missing in this performance, but we will study that later. Surprisingly, Abel is the first of the 2 to shoot and land a takedown. While we have Khabib in full guard, let's quickly backtrack a bit to talk about how Khabib traverses the cage, a concept that remains the same throughout his entire career. Khabib maintains a typical kicking range defensively and employs a consistent pull technique to incoming strikes, with generally his right fist stapled to his chin in defense. Khabib is near universally moving backwards to start fights, until he picks up his rhythm and begins a breakneck pressure style afterwards. As I'm showing on screen from this fight, he is always backpedaling and reorienting. Khabib does a good job of cutting corners to regain cage space, and as his career progresses, he starts to use these escapes as traps for heavier-footed opponents like Michael Johnson. But back to Khabib in bottom guard. Because we don't often see him in guard, let's take a pit stop here to study how he attacks. Khabib opens his guard and steadily inches his feet higher towards Abel's head. This is the setup for either a triangle or armbar from bottom, so Abel needs to be on the lookout. Abel tries to posture up, but Khabib locks an overhook around his right arm with both his legs free to attack the armbar. Khabib nearly reverses him, but Trujillo is able to lock in the defense, and Khabib is forced to relent. To me, one of the most important sequences for demonstrating the key differentiator between Khabib and essentially every other power grappler comes in this sequence on screen now. Khabib elevates Abel by dislodging one of Trujillo's legs, and then pulls himself out from underneath Abel in an incredibly athletic getup. In my opinion, the key to Khabib's dominance comes in his truly exceptional athletic superiority to every fighter he will come to face going forward. When merged with his obvious talent in wrestling, the athleticism in the form of speed, strength, and dexterity advantages make him a borderline impossible grappler to truly defeat on his turf. Immediately after this sequence, Khabib lands his first takedown of what will be a record-setting performance. The key point to see is how deftly Khabib maintains his body lock around the waist of Trujillo. The body lock is the key innovation to the system that Khabib employs specifically. Khabib uses the body lock while pressuring the opponent into the cage to force them to choose a number of outs, all of which are planned for by Khabib. They can inch forward along the cage, expending energy, while never being able to truly escape his grasp. In this case, Khabib will position himself closer to their shoulders and use their own momentum to spike them into the mat. Another option that Khabib will give you is to position himself next to the opponent while maintaining that pressure. He's essentially giving you an opening to use the cage to stand up. In most cases, Khabib will then aggressively reorient the body lock so a majority of his upper body sits above you, causing you to have to power press him while he expends no energy. Sometimes Khabib will let you stand up, but he hooks the leg, like I had previously discussed in my Sean Brady video, so that once you expend all that energy to stand up, he just mat returns you immediately. You wasted energy, he wasted essentially none. The thing about this fight is that within the first 2 to 3 minutes, you have seen essentially everything Khabib is going to do to dominate the full 15. Abel honestly has only a single answer to Khabib. In my opinion, it's pretty embarrassing on his part. He almost never actually fights Khabib's hands, which is day 1 wrestling training. The only answer Abel comes up with is to use a Granby roll to break Khabib's grip. It works the first few times, and then Khabib figures that out too. At that point, Abel is basically stuck and starts looking to Mario Yamasaki to stand him up rather than put actual effort into, cage fighting. My critiques of Trujillo aside, the main question for me watching this fight is, then what? Khabib shows an athletic and control advantage over Abel, but he never does much with it. Khabib wins a controlled grappling 15-minute decision. The most damage he lands comes largely in the punishment taken from the slams he lands on Trujillo. I outlined his sub-attempt from bottom, but he doesn't have much of a plan when in top control yet. This is the main thing separating him from future Khabib. Right now, he is essentially just a stronger Merab Dvalishvili. Finding a finishing option to pair with his prodigious control is needed to not just stall out as an uber-talented grappler. He won't find it in our next fight, but he does show the key next step in his progression against RDA. After Trujillo, Khabib reels off another win versus Pat Healy before setting up a fight with soon-to-be champ RDA. This fight is another great exemplar of the Nurmagomedov system's utilization of passive positioning and leverage. We see a Khabib in this fight who has a much stronger grasp of what he wants to do in the grappling dimension. Every fight, we see Khabib peel away the inefficiencies in his game to hone his skills further and further towards his eventual self. In this fight, we see a fighter much more focused on using throwaway takedown attempts to force RDA to the cage wall before attempting power takedowns to finally ground him, before he locks in that body lock. As I alluded to before, this is also where Khabib starts to develop his answer to my prompt, then what? The first throwaway takedown comes a little over a minute into the first round. Khabib uses the takedown to set up RDA in the now favored cage side pressure situation. But we see RDA sneak an underhook to fight the body lock Khabib has attained. In contrast to Trujillo, where we saw him essentially just accept the situation, RDA is actively fighting Khabib. The takedown Khabib lands is incredibly influential in my arguments surrounding him, Islam, and the system as a whole. Khabib proceeds to just say, okay, sounds good, and lifts RDA off his feet, carries him, and eventually dumps him into that grounded clinch position he prefers. We'll talk more about the Islam dimension of this in his video, but for now let's talk Khabib and the system. What you are seeing is Khabib turning on his prodigious athletic advantage to essentially checkmate RDA, who technically defended against Khabib correctly. Khabib's body, while still maturing physically, has hit a new rung of talent. The Khabib that fought Dustin is absolutely stronger, but we are starting to see Khabib pull away from the pack in terms of athletic advantage. I'm not the only one who sees it. Khabib's manager, Ali Abdelaziz, is smiling like a movie supervillain watching his prodigal fighter slice through RDA's defense like a hot knife through butter. This fight to me is one of the best demonstrators of one of the keys to the system. Khabib demonstrates incredible awareness of how to utilize leverage and passive positioning to weigh on RDA and limit his escapes. The position on screen is a great one to analyze. Look how high Khabib is on RDA, but also ask yourself where his weight is pressing and how easy it is to change where that weight goes. Khabib is not using a ton of muscle to create this position. It's largely passive. Just a weight on RDA's shoulders that makes it incredibly hard to combat with large muscle groups. RDA never seems to slow down in my opinion, so his cardio is up to the task, but he also was never able to mount serious opposition on the ground, aside from a major key that we need to devote a majority of our time to. Khabib is never able to pass RDA's guard. Why is this important? We will be able to see fully on our next breakdown of Iaquinta, but let's devote some time here to analyzing it. Passing your opponent's guard is generally a recipe for establishing better control, submission, and striking opportunities. Khabib particularly prefers mount striking into back takes when opponents relent from the pressure. RDA, a black belt in jiu-jitsu, is one of the toughest guards I have studied in this fight. RDA maintains and reestablishes his guard in multiple ways, but I will hone in on these three. First, at around 2:10 left in the first, Khabib makes his first guard pass attempt. RDA has two butterfly hooks locked into Khabib's legs. Khabib uses RDA's focus on kimuraing his left arm to pass his right leg around the butterfly hook into an open half guard position. RDA is setting up a kimura trap, which for time purposes I won't dive deep into, but check out my Arman Sarukian breakdown for a deeper dive on it. Khabib is essentially forced to relent when RDA closes his guard and stalemates Khabib's pass. One thing to notice is how Khabib stacks up on RDA. Khabib is using the power RDA is putting into that kimura to pull RDA into his left shin. As always, ask yourself where Khabib's weight is pressing. The typical defense of the kimura in BJJ is to grab your gi with the kimura'd arm, but in MMA there is no gi. Fighters generally lock their hands together near their waist while maneuvering their bodies to remove the leverage of the lock. Khabib is fighting it with one arm and the passive pressure of his body. RDA realizes the futility and eventually gives it up. Now our second sequence. At 3:59, we see Khabib take RDA down into open half guard, but RDA makes the crucial mistake we discussed in the system breakdown. He goes for the open guillotine that the system practitioners use to break down their opponent's posture and force them into wasted energy expenditure. RDA needs to regain his full guard to lock in this choke and finish Khabib, but Khabib has the system's pre-built defenses in place to stop this. At 355, we see Khabib having snaked his right leg around RDA's right leg. RDA needs that right leg free to establish full guard and finish the choke. As I said, Khabib is hooking with his right leg and his left leg is sprawled wide for 2 reasons. First, it provides the key leverage which forces RDA into the fence. RDA could use this guillotine to transition to an escape, but that leg and the leverage it gives closes off the major opportunity for a get-up. This is a key point to remember when we talk about Islam, so remember this concept for later. The second point is that I would ask you to imagine how flexible RDA would need to be in order to pull his leg out and over that left leg of Khabib. It's pretty hard to visualize through this medium, but I think if you try to mentally do it, you'll get the idea. Essentially, RDA can't finish the choke, and Khabib is expending no energy to defend by leveraging passive pressure. RDA, on the other hand, is expending a lot of energy to try and free his leg and tighten that choke. RDA attempts to use the non-trapped left foot of his to attack Khabib's right leg that is wrapping RDA's trapped right leg. Khabib adjusts his left leg and hugs it to his midsection. It is now even harder for RDA to free that right leg to finish the choke. I'm a broken record at this point, but raising the leg to passively dissuade the full guard is minimal energy expenditure, whereas RDA is spending a ton of energy in his arms to choke and his legs to free them. RDA eventually releases the guillotine at 312. Khabib has expended minimal energy defending the choke. RDA has expended a ton. This is one of the best examples of the system's main tenet, cardio-attritional warfare. Khabib uses leverage and passive positioning to defend RDA's attack, sapping of energy at little cost. But one key tenet of the system has been missing so far, limb lockdowns. This is why being unable to pass RDA's guard is so much of an issue for Khabib. It's hard to say that RDA is quote-unquote winning by not having his guard passed, but it is, in some sense, a moral victory for RDA, and helps to highlight for us in this and the next fight why limb lockdowns are so vital. At 144 of the second, we see our final mini case study on guard retention. RDA again takes the bait on the guillotine, allowing Khabib to drop him straight into half guard. This time though, RDA has learned to release immediately as the attempt is futile due to Khabib's passive techniques. We watch the two repeatedly battle in a circular pattern. Khabib attempts to pass RDA's guard while RDA maintains his right leg in open half. Khabib has the initial setup of an arm triangle, and passing RDA's guard into side control would be the final setup of the technique, and a likely submission loss for RDA. For context, this would be the first and only submission in RDA's career even to present, aside from an injury submission against Clay Guida early in his career. Then, at 127, we see Khabib lock in an interesting semi-limb lockdown by hooking his right leg to his left calf to limit RDA's ability to regain full guard. At 115, RDA uses left foot to slide Khabib's hook off, and then regains his full guard. So with the 3 studies out of the way, what did we learn? First, don't jump the guillotine on system practitioners. I said it in the previous video, and I will reiterate it again in the next one. It's a trap they use to ground you with little energy expenditure. Second, Khabib, while still dominant, is not able to get into those situations where he rains absolute haymaker ground damage without the ability to pass guard into mount or side control into crucifix. I admit it's a bit hard to see the difference when purely looking at him not being able to do something, and as such we need to transition to our last 2 case studies. We will focus on the last 4 fights of Khabib's career and see how that guard mount pass is essential to the unbridled dominance that Khabib enacts on opponents. Okay, first we're going to look at the first 2 rounds of Khabib's title-winning performance against Iaquinta, and then do a separate case study on his final 3 fights. The major thing we need to see is in contrast to RDA. RDA never let Khabib pass his guard. Iaquinta was not as lucky, and we get to see a broad distinction between the outcomes and actions of these fights. At 305, we see Khabib take down Al right into closed full guard. Al opens his guard to attempt to get up by sucking his legs from beneath Khabib and posting on his right elbow for leverage. This plays right into Khabib's game plan, and he hooks that left arm around Al's head and passes into half guard with the arm triangle set up. Part of the potency of this position is that Khabib is using his shoulders to avert Al's vision and force him to fly blind defensively. Khabib easily slips in a mount with the arm triangle setup still locked in, and Al is in trouble. 2 minutes in, and he has already had his guard passed. We see Al try to set up the Kimura trap, which again averts his eyes to Khabib's intentions. Khabib begins sliding his right leg underneath Al's outstretched legs to lock them into the aforenamed, by Dan Hardy, Dagestani leg iron at 248. Now we see the punchline to my setup in the last 2 case studies. Passing guard into mount is the necessary prerequisite to lock in one of the most important techniques in the system. Locking down Al's legs like this is horrible for him. Al is still chasing that Kimura, but he has absolutely no ability to finish it with leverage. Al needs to get a full guard locked in to garner the necessary power to finish the submission. Like the guillotine before it, Khabib uses the Kimura trap as a trap in a Inception-like plot that would make Christopher Nolan tear up at its sheer complexity. So we have our first look at what Khabib does with that guard pass, but we need to see more to truly analyze its efficacy. Our next sequence comes at 105. Khabib had postured up to land strikes on Al and used his defenses to sneak into half guard while quickly sliding his right leg over to lock in the Dagestani leg irons. Khabib sits back on Al's feet to put extra pressure on them while using his head to push Iaquinta to the fence and striking with his left hand to land hard damage. Al's choices are essentially to eat the damage, try to fight off the leg iron, or give his back to defend from damage and attempt to get up. Al chooses the latter, and Khabib jumps onto the body lock half clinch position he loves. Khabib rides out control while landing damage and steadily tiring Al further. Our final sequence of guard passing for study comes at 3:29 left of the second. Al opens his full guard to attempt to get up by again posting on his elbow for leverage. Khabib enters half guard and allows Al to expend the energy while giving his back. Khabib now again has that body lock he used to perfection, and he rides out attritional control until 2:31, where Khabib again enters the limb lockdown procedure. We even see him maneuver Al by rotating him perpendicular to the fence. Al makes the incorrect decision to try and counter that momentum by escaping to the opposite side. Khabib pounces and backpacks him, leading to the two key sequences of this fight that differentiate it from the final three fights of Khabib's career. Those who have watched Khabib's late career have seen this sequence play out over and over before. Khabib backpacks and locks in the partially grounded rear naked choke / neck crank submission that finished Dustin and Conor. But this time is different. Iaquinta is a substantially superior submission defender to the aforementioned two. At 155, Khabib locks and nearly finishes a rear naked choke that Al perfectly defends. Al rolls to his back to avoid another attempt and eats some punishment for his trouble. They fight back and forth for tens of seconds, where Khabib attempts rear naked chokes and then strikes when Al repostures. Khabib recognizes the stalling state they are in and uses the next reposture at 117 to set up an arm triangle. At 111, we see Al grab the back of his knee, which is a defense to the arm triangle used to make it incredibly difficult for Khabib to pass to his left and lock the choke in fully. As this is the end of the second submission defense sequence, let's summarize. Al was not able to maintain his guard as effectively as RDA, leading to Khabib assuming more tactically advantageous control and attack positions. We see this in the increase in ground damage absorbed over these 2 rounds. Al ate 29 significant ground strikes, compared to 18 total significant ground strikes absorbed by RDA over the full 3-round fight. That is a greater than 50% increase of damage absorbed on the ground and a full round less of fight time. Thus, passing guard is essential to Khabib's striking game plan, and conversely, retaining guard stalls his striking but does not eliminate it entirely. While Al was lesser in his defense compared to RDA, he was superior to the following 3 opponents because of his highly developed submission defense skills. He didn't get submitted, but lost a decisive decision in the end and represents the last fighter to survive to the end of a fight with Khabib. So now we must discuss the final case study to understand the fully blossomed Khabib Nurmagomedov. First up, Khabib's eternal nemesis, Conor McGregor. I'm going to keep these focused to limit how long this video ends up, so for each submission we will study Khabib's setups and adaptations to understand how he submitted each opponent. In the first round of their fight, Conor was able to relatively effectively defend Khabib's takedowns. His defense was roughly on par with Al's, but he expended substantially more energy in defense than Al did. He was able to ground Conor and grinded him out to an easy first round 10-9. It took less than a minute in the second for Khabib to ground Conor and lock down his legs after passing his guard. He too dominated this round without achieving a finish, seeming content to punish Conor for his transgressions in the lead up to the fight. The third seemed to be a round Khabib took off to strike. Khabib has a tendency to do this in later rounds. I highlighted only the first 2 rounds of Al's fight with Khabib because they spent most of the next 3 rounds striking with each other. But now we come to the all-important 4th round. Khabib spent those first 2 rounds grinding down Conor's energy, and now the effects of that will have come to roost. Khabib employs his typical takedown into cage pressure, trips to ground McGregor into the cage corner, wraps his body lock, and now Khabib's system is in place. Per usual, he rides out control while waiting for Conor to make a mistake. This comes in the form of McGregor giving up too much of his back, and Khabib rolls him into a backpack. Recognizing Conor's momentum counter, Khabib mounts him. Khabib then occupies his sort of half limb lockdown, half mount position while pressing Conor into the mount. Again, he waits for Conor to tire and makes a desperate mistake. Conor gives up enough space for Khabib to attempt an arm triangle that Conor effectively defends, but exerts more energy he doesn't have. Khabib uses this to move into 3/4 mount. Conor thinks he smells an advantage and pushes off the cage in an attempt to regain his guard. Khabib counters into a limb lockdown and steadily advances his mount ever higher again. Conor again gives his back, but this time his exhaustion leaves him open to a rear naked choke. Conor crawls his way to the cage to try and scrape Khabib off, which somewhat works, but Khabib has enough space to lock in the final neck crank for the submission. This is the beginning of Khabib's apex. He has steadily chipped away at his inefficiencies, and now has his strategy in place. Pass guard, ride out control while using leverage to sap their energy, wait for them to make exhausted, bad decisions, and attempt submissions. If they defend them effectively, reset and restart. Al was able to defend them all to a decision victory. Conor succumbed to the neck crank. So next up is Poirier. Dustin has his moments in this fight, but to me, this is the best Khabib has ever looked as a full mixed martial artist. As the third rolls around, Dustin is noticeably tired, like Conor before him. At 427, Khabib shoots a throwaway takedown that Poirier counters with the famous guillotine. This guillotine is somewhat famous because it was over-exaggerated by the commentary team to the point that Khabib still addresses how not tight it was, even discussing it with his head of state. Like all guillotines before, Khabib has his passive trap, and Dustin has to use arm strength to try and finish it, which he doesn't. In the end, this was the last of his energy in my analysis. Khabib's head pops out, the crowd goes wild, Khabib immediately passes into the limb lockdown mount, attacks Dustin's post arm to break down his posture while inching his mount ever higher. Khabib maneuvers himself into the perfect pressure leverage position and rains down strikes. Khabib continues to rain strikes until Dustin makes an exhausted mistake by giving his neck, which Khabib happily obliges and submits him in the third. Again, same system with the added benefit of a guillotine trap setup. Lock down limbs, advance, attack, submit, or reset and repeat. So finally we have Justin Gaethje. Going into this fight, the question of Gaethje's takedown defense remained. Gaethje had never been taken down in a professional MMA fight and was a collegiate wrestler, so his defense was an unknown. Could he hold up similarly to Iaquinta or RDA, albeit with substantially improved striking? How would the calf kicks alter Khabib's takedown offense? In the end, I was disappointed as it didn't turn into as much of a test as I expected. Gaethje landed solid calf kick damage, but we never got to see it take effect. With less than a minute left, Khabib took down Gaethje with little exertion. Khabib immediately locked down his legs, attacked his posting wrist, and used it to advance higher into Gaethje's guard, eventually mounting him and locking in a near-finishing armbar that was saved by the bell. Gaethje lives on to the second round. It was at this moment I realized that Gaethje was going to be less of a threat than either Conor or Dustin on the ground. Granted, Conor survived to the fourth largely because Khabib wanted to beat him into submission and didn't want to finish him quickly, but his defenses were absolutely superior to Gaethje's. A little after a minute into the second, Khabib catches a leg kick into a takedown. Gaethje gives up his back, which Khabib immediately pounces on. Khabib rides out Gaethje's attempt to scrape him off and assumes full mount. Khabib tries for an arm triangle, but is defended well, so he relents. Khabib slides his left leg up for an armbar setup. But we need to pause here. There has been some post-fight myth-making based on the following sequence. Khabib's father, Abdulmanap, passed prior to this fight, which left a major hole in his life and led to his retirement from fighting after this fight. Gaethje's parents were in attendance for this fight. Khabib met Gaethje's parents 3 days prior. Gaethje had previously claimed he would never tap to a submission in MMA. Khabib says that he didn't attempt the armbar because he didn't want to break Justin's arm in front of Gaethje's father out of respect. Here's him saying, "It is in my estimation a fabrication." I will now narrate to you what I believe actually happened. Khabib passes his right leg higher to finish the setup. To finish the armbar, Khabib will need to slide his left leg on top of Gaethje's head. He proceeds to attempt to do this, but his toes become stuck in the cage. For some context, the toes stuck in the cage were broken in his training for this fight. We see earlier that those same toes are bandaged together in a splint, which is the treatment for broken toes.
Apparently, he was in the hospital. He broke his foot. Yeah. So 3 weeks ago. So he has 2 broken toes and a bone in his foot that's broken or something like that. That's what his corner was telling me.
Gaethje uses that momentary break in momentum to reverse Khabib, while Khabib very obviously displays how much pain he is in. Khabib is able to compose himself and finishes a triangle from bottom to finish Gaethje. I will reshow the setup to the armbar in slow motion to give full context so you can make your own estimation if I'm correct or not. In the end, if the story is superior to the truth, print the story. So we have finished our case studies. Let's wrap this up by answering 3 burning questions I have. First, is Khabib the greatest of all time? Second, can you stop him? And third, if you can't stop him, how do you slow him down? Alright, so my answer to the first question, no. Khabib is absolutely one of the most dominant fighters and probably the most dominant power grappler the UFC has ever seen. But he is not the greatest to ever do it. The obvious follow-up question is, of course, is he the greatest lightweight of all time? And I would say yes to that. There's been a lot of revisionist history about the lightweight division in Khabib's wake, but I do believe he is the best all time as it currently stands. Khabib, Oliveira, BJ Penn, and Eddie Alvarez to me represent the Mount Rushmore of lightweight greats, with RDA a very close fifth. Khabib's undefeated record is fictional for two reasons. One, he entered the UFC 18-0 after being a pro for only 3 years. His father handpicked fights for him en route to that undefeated record. Want evidence of that? Look at Khabib's opponent's pre-UFC professional record. It's abysmal. Two, probably most importantly, he lost that fight to Gleison Tibau. I can hear the comments already, but go rewatch that fight. He lost. But Gleison was 80% TRT in that portion of his career, so I count that as a no contest at best, honestly. But in reality, undefeated records mean nothing. Strength of competition and means of defeat mean much more to me. His defeats of Iaquinta and RDA mean a lot more to me than his victories over Conor and Dustin Poirier, because he is matching strength for strength with the former two and coming out dominantly over them. Conor and Dustin are nowhere near the grappler Khabib is, so he absolutely destroyed them on the ground. Gaethje, in comparison, had one of the worst showings I have honestly seen against Khabib, and that's saying something when compared to Khabib's mauling of Michael Johnson. So now the all-important question, can we stop Khabib? My answer is yes, because of course you can, but I haven't seen an effective way to do it when we talk about peak Khabib. His mix of athleticism and talent make him an incredibly hard puzzle to solve, and I have yet to see someone put on tape an actually effective strategy of beating him. The third point and obvious follow-up is how to slow him down, though. Trujillo, RDA, and Iaquinta each show a piece. Trujillo showed that Granby rolls and actually attacking his body lock are essential to avoiding the cardio attrition against the fence that Khabib employs universally. If he gets you down, reestablishing your full guard and maintaining it is key to limiting the damage he inflicts on you, and opens up possibilities for reversals and escapes, as shown by RDA. What kinds of reversals and escapes? Not sure. No one ever did it. Finally, Iaquinta shows that having a keen submission defense setup plan keeps you safe from being finished, and Khabib's striking output is not such that you'll be worried about being finished due to strikes. The latter portion of his career didn't feature one of his early career tools, which is the half guard to side control to crucifix pass, followed by hellacious elbows that he used to finish Thiago Tavares. Everyone will of course want me to comment on Tony Ferguson's chances. I broke it down in my video on him, so check that out. But as I said, I won't give my take even though my analysis should make it pretty obvious. That fight is so much better in our collective minds than a simple binary win or lose answer. But there is one fighter I believe has the best chance to not only beat, but finish Khabib. That man has a name, and that name is Oliveira. I'm going to be doing a full breakdown of his grappling next week, so be ready for me to address it there. If you like this video, consider liking and subscribing. It helps us immensely. As I talked about in my prior video on the Nurmagomedov system, this video is dedicated to the memory of my Uncle Ken. My Uncle Ken died of complications stemming from a heart attack. If you like this video, please consider donating to the American Heart Disease Association in the link in the description. Thank you for sticking around for this message. Hug your family members and remind them how much you love them today.